Hello and welcome to Foshty. Today I am interviewing Alozie. Do you go by a different name?
It depends on who says it.
Okay.
Like if it's a Oyibo person, it's Oge or Ogi.
Okay.
If it's Ndibai, then it's Oge Chika. Or Oge.
So you actually tell people Oge Chika Alozie.
I tell them Oge Chika, but to make it easy, I say Oge.
Okay. All right. Great. So we're going to talk to Dr. Oge today, and this is Foshty. As always, we're going to talk to young African immigrants and explore their stories of living here, transitioning, and just really blending their experiences of growing up sometimes in Africa and growing up in the U.S. So,
I'm excited that you called me young. That's first things first. So I'm really excited about that part.
I think we're all young at heart.
At heart.
Exactly.
At heart.
Exactly. So
thank you.
We're young. So, when did you come to the U.S. and where do you consider home? I'm trying to start with that question because I think it helps give context as to what the transition or what living here actually means to you.
Yeah, so for me, I came here being the U.S. multiple times.
Okay.
The first time I came to the U.S., I was 4, a long time ago. I was here from the age of 4 to the age of 16. I was self-deported by my lovely mother. I love her to death.
Self-deported? Okay.
We can get to that.
Okay, yeah.
So my mother self-deported me when I was 16. I was a junior in high school. And then I was in Nigeria until I was 30. Came back when I was 30 after going to med school and working for a while. And so, yeah, those are really the 2 times, sort of my 2 periods. It's a period piece coming back and forth. Right.
Okay, so we're going to sort of address those in 2 completely different contexts. Cool. Coming here at 4. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure you remember what that was.
I don't remember a lot about 4.
Okay, but growing up here,
mm-hmm.
What was that experience? Did you grow? I'm assuming in your teenage years, did you feel like you were an American? Or was there that sense of being... So, imagine
different.
From 4...
Yeah.
Did you feel the difference, being that you had been here for, since childhood?
I think there was, even then, a dichotomy. I remember... Well, first of all, I grew up in Minnesota. So, St. Paul, Minnesota, very Caucasian, not a lot of Black, African-American, or African in terms of population.
Mm-hmm.
Because of a host of things... Minnesota focused on bringing in immigrant communities. And so the Hmong community was one of the first communities that came in, I think in the 60s or 70s. There's a large Nigerian community when I was growing up in the 70s into the 80s. And so where I lived in Roseville, Minnesota was very Caucasian.
Okay.
And so I probably did think I was white. But at the same time, almost all the Black people I knew were Nigerians. My mom was a foreign student. She was getting her bachelor's and master's and PhD. And so all of the people I knew that were Black were Nigerian.
Okay.
And so I had that community, but that community didn't live where I lived.
Okay.
And so we lived in a student housing community, and then we lived somewhere else again so we could get a really good school district. And so all my friends were white. And I never thought about it until probably around 13, 14. I think a couple of things happened at the same time. I realized that I was Black, and more importantly, I realized I was poor.
Oh, okay.
I think that was the driver.
14 range.
Yeah, that was the driver.
So there was the class issue, being poor.
Yeah, and I think the class issue. I think the class issue was actually more. I never felt that I was Black until closer to high school. And that was just because I had somebody call me a nigger, right? And so that led to a host of other disciplinary and fighting and just a host of things.
And how old were you?
Probably 14.
Okay, and that was your
13,
first time
14 that I had been called a derogatory racial slur.
To your face, okay.
Yeah.
And in that moment, if you can remember, what did you feel?
I knew the word.
Right.
I had heard the word. I think you have to remember, for me, 13 was 85, and so hip-hop, rap, I'm 47, but you said I was young, so I'm so
young
excited.
We'll
I'm so excited.
Okay.
But that was 85, Curtis Blow, a host of other things around hip-hop and R&B, and so I was actually finding some of myself in music, right? Finding some of myself in that hip-hop culture, but not really being black.
Right. Like you felt different.
Yeah, I felt different.
Right.
So, and it was weird, right? I was the kid that knew all the words to the hip, a hop, a hibbit, to the hibbit, the hip, hip, the hop, and all the rest. But at the same time, I had Dale and Corey and Brent and Doug as my friends, right?
Okay.
And they were all great friends to me. But it wasn't until coming back from a basketball practice, probably late middle school, I think, because we were still in the middle school building, and some kid called me a nigger. Right?
Okay.
And it was actually my daddy owned your daddy, you nigger, and that kind of thing. And so that led to an altercation.
Right.
And from then on in, I started realizing, yeah, I am different.
Just how different you
are.
Yeah,
just how different. I mean,
really...
I knew from a financial standpoint, we were just really, really poor. But that exacerbated it. And I think that led to a period, I won't call it darkness, but of me losing my way. I mean, you know how it is as a Nigerian kid, right? Nigerian parents always want you to do the best and overachieve.
You do the right thing. And
they're always really excited
all
when
the
you
goals
bring
that
in
they
the
have set for
National
you.
Honor Society and straight A's and 3.9.
Right.
And I was like, this is all great, but this doesn't help me make any money.
Right.
And I haven't bought jeans in 2 years, right? And all my friends have cars and stuff. And not that that's the right way to think about life, but in that time as a kid.
And at that age.
That age. And I mean, my dad died when I was 4, so not that that's an excuse, but hey, I learned to sort of not fend for myself, but arrange and find ways financially.
Right, and take on a little bit more responsibility early on too.
Fair enough.
I imagine. Okay.
Not legal responsibility.
Right, but just in the family context, that's something that happens when the patriarch of the family is not there and you're a young boy. You just naturally begin to take on some roles quicker than you normally would. So by the time you were self-deported, you said you were 16, what caused that? Was that always an option that your mother had discussed with you, or was that just...
So it was really an extension of a host of the things that were going on in my life.
Okay.
Right? I mean, she was a foreign student. She was on a J visa. J visa has a sort of Damocles hanging over you that you have to return to your country at some point in time, and you need to renew it every year. And so she was in this constant cycle, degree progression. And so at the same time, I was having these issues around finding ways to generate income that weren't always legal and getting into trouble with the law. And so she made a decision to send me home. Okay. I remember in 1988, I was a junior in high school, and said we're going to go visit my grandfather. And my visit turned into a 12-year sabbatical.
So she did not tell you what was going to happen.
Yeah.
You get back to Nigeria.
I get back to Nigeria.
Do you remember what that felt like? Well, had you been
Terrifying.
going often?
Never.
Okay, so this was your first time.
First time ever.
Since
the age of 16. Since the age of 4, yeah.
This was your first time going back, and you
terrifying.
Okay.
Terrifying. I mean, first of all, you got to remember, I grew up in Minnesota.
Right.
So I wasn't used to black people.
Not used to this.
I wasn't used to black people, and so just being around that many black people terrified me. I remember very clearly as a 16-year-old being around that many black people and being like, this is too much.
That's interesting.
You fly into Lagos, and we were living with a friend, or stayed with one of her friends that was in Ikoyi, and even then in Ikoyi, I was like, man, there's too many black people here. This is a lot. Okay. And then from there, it was road trip to the east, to Umuahia, because that's where my mom's from. Went to Mbise, so my dad's people went to Umuahia, and just that constant, there's no electricity. There's no water. Right. I don't have a running shower. Where are my J's?
Were you prepared?
Of course, I couldn't be prepared. I was going on vacation.
Your mom talked to you about Nigeria,
sort of what to expect?
So, so this was all just brand new experience. I am here. This is...
Tabla rasa.
Did that feel like home?
Not then, it didn't.
Not then.
No. Okay. It felt very foreign.
Just very foreign.
Very foreign.
You were going to someone else's land.
WTF? What is going on here? Why am I here? And why are people always holding my hand? This is really, really weird. I didn't consider myself to be homo.
Right.
So not even that, but men, young boys in the village, they're always holding your hand. And it's not that I was homophobic, but it was really, really weird to me. Like, why is he touching
that's
me?
not the norm.
And why
That
is he
not your
holding
norm.
my hand?
Right.
It's ironic considering what I do now. That
You
I
hold
had that.
hands?
No,
Okay.
I'm an HIV doctor.
Okay.
It's a majority of my
Hands.
No, I try not to hold random people's hands. Majority of my clientele is men having sex with men. Right?
Okay.
But then I was like, touch my hand. What's going on? Anyway, so sorry.
No, you're fine. So, you get home, you get to experience Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
I say home because
it's home, yeah.
Nigeria.
It's home, yeah.
And then at what point does your mom tell you you're not coming back?
So this was probably middle December '88, right after Christmas. And my mom, I mean, I love my mom to death, but she always had this thing, right? Well, she always had a saying: "You don't build a house for talking." Right? And based on that, and she said it to Nibo, and I can't remember how I would say it to Nibo right now, but based on that, when she wanted to talk to me, however, she would literally be at the edge of my bed and she'd be tapping me at 4 a.m. And she'd be like,
So the quiet early morning
it's always 4
when it's
a.m.
all silent.
And then she would break some sort of devastating news or some punishment. And so, yeah, she told me, and I was like, 16-year-old kid, bravado. I was like, no, not happening. And yeah, it was really touch and go for some days. And then elders came into the picture and they were like, you just don't do this, that, or a third. You're going to stay. And the next thing I ended up at Federal Government College of Kigwe.
What grade?
SS1, so that'd be 10th grade. So I actually lost a year in the transition.
Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so she pulled you, she had you in SS1, 16.
SS1. Luckily for me, so my dad passed when I was 4. His older sister and her husband lived in Owerri. And so they took me in. And so that was my home base. And then they had a son, Ikenna, who actually lives in Houston. And so he became my BFF once I got to Federal.
He was in the same school?
Yes, he was in Federal Kigwe as well. Same grade, same set, same everything. Same class, like 1A or whatever it was.
So that helped with the transition because you had
immensely. I had a person. And because of him, I had a social circle. And so then, you know how it is, but there's a transition period or a sort of a honeymoon period where people kind of leave you alone as a fat American boy. And they'll be gentle to you until they're like, nah, it's too much. You've been here long enough. We're going to beat you up now. We're going to flog you and you can do frog jump and fetch water and cut grass with cutlass and all the rest.
Get mixed up with everybody else. When did that change, the switch from, I don't really like this, I am being forced to be here, to I actually
Within the first year.
Within the first year?
Within the first year.
Really?
I mean, I have always... Hopefully, I've always felt that I'm pretty adaptable, and that was proof to me because I mean there are very few things in your life that are that jarring.
Right, especially at 16.
It took me probably 3 to 6 months to understand the system, learn the system, and then find ways to hopefully master the system. Right, and so that was really how it happened. Within a year, by the time I was SS2. I felt comfortable. I felt that it was just normal life.
It began to feel like home, I imagine.
I became a prefect, and from there it was just normal. Day to day.
Okay, it's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Now, kind of talk me through the process of going, first of all, with the conversation with your mom, was there a departure date? Was there a conversation about, this is what happens after high school and college?
No, just
you're here and you're back.
Just you were here. And I think it was one of those unspoken conversations whereby I knew the game around immigration.
Mm-hmm.
She was in her PhD dissertation year, and so she really only had 2 more years to go. The reality is that she wasn't going to stay in the U.S. after her PhD if her only child was in Nigeria.
Right.
My mom didn't say when I was coming back. She didn't say if I was coming back. But I think, deep down, even as a kid, not knowing the details of the world around you, you realize that you came out of poverty, that just because you finish high school doesn't mean that the poverty is going to change. Right? So there's not suddenly a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And so it wasn't ever really a thought in my head. As I was finishing Federal, it was to go to university.
You never thought, I want to go back to the US?
I had a fleeting thought, maybe an SS1, SS2, but those were pipe dreams, right? And I just didn't have the the resources or the wherewithal to go back. And so I stayed home.
Okay.
I'm glad I did.
Why?
If nothing else, I didn't have to have $250,000 medical school debt. I mean, I think from a financial standpoint, that alone, for my generation of physicians and dentists and pharmacists that came out of Nigeria in the early O's all the way to 2010-ish, comparatively, we didn't have that burdensome financial debt. And so that's immense.
So how did you, and this is probably a display of my ignorance since I didn't go to school in Nigeria, how did you pay for school? I mean, I know you mentioned your father passed away.
Yeah,
so
Nigerian school is, what was it then, 1,000 naira a semester? 2,000 naira a semester? Yeah.
Wow.
And so it was.
I mean, when you say that, it's just like, wow. I'm sure it's not as cheap right now, but
it's not as cheap and not anymore. But I mean, and so it's one of the things that when my generation of Nigerians that are in the U.S. or in UK, and especially the medical diaspora, right, when some of our colleagues say, I don't owe Nigeria anything. Okay, you don't owe the country anything, but you do owe them about $250,000
considering what it would have cost
tuition,
you to do that
right?
here.
So you can't just say you're self-made. Nobody's self-made.
Okay.
They got to break somewhere somehow.
Right.
And so it makes me laugh when I have colleagues that say that.
So what made you, when you ultimately decided to come back here? Or to come to the U.S. Because I don't know if you consider it coming back or if that was just going to the U.S.
It was coming back because I'd been here before. But I think more importantly is that my course in Nigeria, my Nigerian journey had run its course.
Okay.
Right? I had gone to University of Benin. I'd gone to medical school, finished medical school, done my house job, was doing youth service, and came to this realization that I couldn't practice medicine in Nigeria.
What caused that realization? What was there a defining moment when it hit you that this is not going to work?
No, there wasn't a defining moment. It was just understanding as you graduate and there's just a lack of resources for medical care, right? And then in the back of my head, knowing I was in Yankee before, why can't I go back?
Right.
People were already starting to talk about doing PLAB and USMLE. And it's actually shocking when I think back, considering I'm a data guy and information guy now, how little knowledge I had about the process then, right? I was just living day to day and going through the motions. And then one day I just realized that I can't do this.
Yeah.
That I need something different. I sort of liked public healthy things. I was into water, malaria, TB. And so I applied to do a master's in public health at a bunch of places and then finally decided to return to Minnesota.
Okay.
Where I did my MPH. Okay.
So you came to the U.S. to do the master's in public health, being a licensed doctor
in Nigeria. Yeah, and so I mean, again, in my generation, when we were leaving Nigeria, there was a playbook that majority of us followed.
Okay.
And the playbook was get a visa by doing a master's in public health. During the 2 or 3 year MPH program, do all of your USMLE exams.
While you're doing the master's.
While you're doing the master's and probably working. Apply for a residency program, get into a residency program within a 5-year period. Okay. And then once you're in residency, I mean, the rest is really history. Yeah.
So did you follow the playbook?
Yeah, I followed the playbook. I had to take a 1-year break because I thought I was still Michael Jordan. I was playing rec ball and I tore my knees a year apart. And so I couldn't work. And so I had to ask for a 1-year deferment. But apart from that, I came back 2002 and 2005. I started residency. So I did my MPH and all my exams in 3 years.
Does that playbook still work? So let's imagine there is, a young doctor in Nigeria that's looking for an option and comes across this episode. Does that playbook still work? Considering they don't know who else, or they haven't spoken to anybody else about it.
It works, but they're on a tighter leash. Okay. And this is what I mean. In my cohort or cadre of people that came, you probably had a 10-year window. Okay. The longer you spend, the harder it gets. But back then, a lot of residency programs would say you can get into residency 10 years out of medical school. Okay. Now, the average, and I'd say almost majority of good residency programs is 5 years. So you have from the year you graduate in Nigeria to the year you get in 5 years.
5 years.
The problem is that in the Nigerian system, to get your license, you have to do 1 year housemanship. And then most of us are just sort of, it's part of our DNA in Nigeria to do youth service. And youth service is another year. So 2 years.
It's not a requirement?
It's a requirement if you need a federal job. It's not a requirement to get a job. But, Nigeria is very federal based, right? Very federalistic. And so if you do that playbook, then you only have 3 years to get into the country, write all your exams, and find a residency program. The problem these days is that there's so many people applying for residency that yes, you can get in if you have really good scores, but a lot of times it's a function of, do you know somebody in that program? They'll put in a good word for you.
I see.
Right? And so that's part of the issue. So a lot of people that I counsel now, I say, listen, if you can't do it in 5 years, go to London. Go to the UK. You can still go to the UK 10 years out. Or I have a cousin that just did that a couple months ago. But if you're coming to the US, then you're going to have to forfeit either housemanship or youth service. Or you're going to have to, and it's not impossible, but I tell people, just study for the exams while you're doing
all of
housemanship.
That stuff over
Right?
there,
The problem is that they don't think about it. It's really hard to conceptualize these things when you're in the Nigerian condition because you're surviving day to day. When you get here, yes, you're still surviving, you need a job, but you also know that whatever you're doing is construction or megad or whatever, it has a terminal date. You cannot do that forever.
It's not going to happen forever.
No, that's not going to pay your bills forever.
So when you say whatever you're doing, construction, that's here. When people come out here and they're doctors and they're doing
construction. I did some kitchen stuff, some parking stuff.
Some kitchen stuff? Like cooking or
like
cleaning?
Cleaning. I didn't have to do a lot of that, so I actually was really blessed and I didn't have to do a ton of that because I was lucky to get research assistantships that paid for a lot of my school intermittently. But when I needed more, I would do that. Or I was also lucky I had some people that I could take loans from. But it's really hard to do all that you need to do in Nigeria. And the USMLE has made it even more difficult. There's no center to do USMLE in Nigeria. You have to go to Ghana.
Oh, wow.
It's not necessarily a problem in West Africa context, but it's an extra thing.
It's an extra step.
Right?
And that's always been the case?
Always been since I'm aware of it, it's always been the case. As opposed to if you want to do a master's in anything, it's tougher than GRE. You can take in multiple centers in Nigeria.
Okay. So I'm curious, you come here, you want to do your residency. What was the desired job? Like, what was the goal when you came in? And I'm only asking because I would like to find out if you are still on that trajectory. Are you where you expected to be? Have you exceeded what you wanted? What was the vision you had when you came in?
I don't know whether I've exceeded it. I mean, that's not for me to judge. I know that when I came to this country, I wanted to be a cardiologist. And so I came in, my MPH was in cardiovascular epidemiology. And so that was the plan. I did it for the first year. And I mean, my cardiology friends always tell me, well, you weren't smart enough. That's not a thing. But I just didn't enjoy it. It wasn't that it was boring or whatever. I was doing some cardiovascular epi course over the summer. I was like, this doesn't speak to me. I'm not having fun doing this. So I think I took time off during that summer, did some other odd jobs, didn't really have a job. And right around that time, my mom's sister contracted HIV in Nigeria. And whether that was a trigger, an inflection point, I don't know. The worrying about it, trying to learn about how you can help somebody in Nigeria living with HIV, all of those sort of public health, infectious related processes triggered something in me, and so I switched to infectious disease epidemiology. So that's what I finished with. And so by working in that space, I then became the student health president. They have this body, student health, and then I did my research in HIV, my master's research. That got me connected to somebody at the county hospital who we hit it off, and he wrote a letter of recommendation for me when I was doing my residency. So I did my internal medicine residency and then did my infectious disease fellowship focused on HIV. I had my HIV clinic at the county hospital still. So by the time
all in Minnesota?
All in Minnesota. So by the time I was done with all of that in 2010, I was really certain that I wanted to do HIV. I mean, I was an infectious disease physician, but I also wanted to do HIV. And so as I started looking around the country, because my wife didn't really fancy Minnesota anymore because it was too cold, I realized as I was interviewing at places like Baltimore and Atlanta and Miami that they wanted an ID doctor, but they didn't necessarily care about the HIV part. Okay. And I was still young and stubborn then, and I was like, yeah.
And that you were specific about.
Yeah, I wanted to do HIV. I could do everything else, but I wanted to do HIV. And then I got a call from a recruiter just randomly. He said, hey, do you want to work in Texas? And I've been looking in Houston because I have friends in Houston. Shout out to Boogie. I have friends in Houston. My mom's sister lives in Houston still, right? I have a first cousin that's in Longview, which is not very far from here. And so I was like, yeah, Texas would be great. And he was like, yeah. I said, is it near Houston? He said, yeah, it's near Houston. And then he sent me the portfolio. I was like, El Paso. And I was like, I Googled it. I was like, I put in, what was it then? MapQuest it. Right. And I was like, 10-hour drive. What's he talking about? It's not close at all. But he just said, just come on and interview. They're really interested. And I went out, and it was a great interview. And they made me feel at home, and they let me focus on HIV, and they let me build a system, build something new. And so it was probably the best decision that I made professionally. I was able to come into the organization and just get a lot of velocity and momentum around new programs they didn't have, sort of a new view on things coming from external. Not that external is always good, but I had energy, I'd been trained well, and so I wanted to do... You were passionate about what you were doing,
so that helped. Yeah. So now that how long have you been in El Paso? I mean, of course...
Almost 10 years, 9.5 years.
9.5 years, going 10 years. How often do you go back to Nigeria?
So for a long time, I didn't go back. Okay. I probably didn't go back. So I came back to the States in 2002. I didn't go back to Nigeria again until 2008. Oh, wow. Right. Life gets in the way. Right. Having kids, money, starting residency and everything. So I went in 2008. I didn't go back again after that until I think 2014. Right. And 2014 specifically was the year that I got my green card. Oh, okay. 2014 was also an inflection year for me because that's the year I quit the university to go create my own clinic. Okay. I came back to the university for a host of reasons that we can talk about later, but yeah, and so since 2014, I've probably gone on average every year. Last year I went twice. Okay. Wait, this year I've gone twice as well. In January, just got back in October. Last year I went twice, and so my goal is to go at least once a year. I have a group that does mission trips. We do medical outreach missions in Nigeria. And so that's the driver, but my mom still lives there. She's retired from the University of Benin, and so I go to just check on her and make sure she's okay.
Your kids, do you go home with them?
And they've gone, my daughter has gone 3 times, my son has gone 9. One is 13 and, sorry. My son has gone twice. He's 9. Okay. My daughter's gone 3 or 4 times. She's 13. Okay. But yeah, they enjoy it. Right. They enjoy it, yeah.
Do they feel like it's home?
No, of course not.
Of course not. No. Do you feel like it's home?
I still feel that Nigeria is home. But I also, the rational part of me also realizes that it's not really. Right? That it's home because that's where I have my roots of adulthood in. Okay. That's where I became, quote unquote, a man. That's where my mom is. Right. I still have a draw to what some of my friends call the fantasy for us that is now Nigeria. But in reality, it would take a significant break, schism, inflection point for us to go home. I mean, before somebody in my job or whatever you want to call it says, I'm going to uproot and go to Nigeria, that job better be kick-ass. Right. Right?
But why is Nigeria a fantasy?
Because in reality, our children are never going to live there. Our children are never going to live there. Okay. A lot of us build houses in Nigeria that we see once a year, once every other year. Somebody else lives in it and runs it down. They continue to ask us for money for upkeep. Right. It's a fantasy because it's not rational. Right? There's no rationality around it, right?
Okay. Do you invest in Nigeria?
Yeah, I've invested in Nigeria.
Okay. Yeah. So it's just you wouldn't necessarily reside, retire, or live.
Well, I don't think I could retire there for sure because who would I talk to? All my friends are here.
Okay.
Or the United Kingdom.
All right.
Right? And so it's funny, when I go to Nigeria, I don't have a lot of friends to hang out with.
None of your friends are there.
I'll say this, from my medical school class, the people that I was closest to, 80% are outside of Nigeria. And that's a group of about 50 guys.
Yeah.
80% of us are outside Nigeria.
Okay.
Right? So, yes, I can go to Nigeria, but now that I think about it, so 2 of them are there, but they were in this most recent government. So, I mean, their attachment to Nigeria is they were in the Ministry of Works and Housing.
Right.
They're in the Ministry of Health.
Right.
And so there's absolutely no reason for them to come to America. You can't pay them enough.
It's not worth it for
I have
them.
another friend that's a deputy chief medical director in Nasarawa State or somewhere, right? Again, his bread is buttered in Nigeria. Right. He can't attain the same status and velocity in America.
Especially at this point. Because I feel like there's a window for you to come over and try to make something out of your experience, and sometimes that window...
Yeah, and I have friends that are far smarter and far wealthier than I am that have set up clinics or businesses or dialysis centers in Nigeria. And even they will tell you, they'll be like, dude, I do it because I feel like I should. If that was where my money was made, I wouldn't continue to do this. Because they're losing money there on average, right? If they were to take how they operationalize their businesses here, the Nigerian business is not running the same at all.
What sort of investments do you have there?
I have some land.
Okay.
I have
So nothing
shares.
in the medical space?
No, not in the medical space yet. We so part of the side story is that when I was in Minnesota, I got introduced to health information technology. Okay. And so this is a period in time, the early O's into 2010, 2011, 12, where the federal government was actually giving people money to change from paper to electronic medical record. Okay. And so I got involved in a lot of those implementations and installations and Sigma processes around making them efficient. And so when I came to Texas Tech, one of the other things that they asked me to do, apart from being an HIV doctor, is to start up the EMR space. Okay. And so I was Chief Medical Informatics Officer there. I became Chief Health Informatics Officer in 2015 up until a couple months ago. And so when I look at healthcare in Nigeria, I don't just look at it as in giving care. That's what I use the medical missions for. But I also look at how we can enhance systems. And so that's talking to hospital systems and commissioners and ministers. How can we change the way healthcare is provided in Nigeria and Sub-Saharan Africa, understanding that we probably have the largest penetrance of mobile device use because of how telephones came to be in Nigeria specifically. And if we're really going to catalyze healthcare in Nigeria and a lot of Sub-Saharan Africa, we have to use mobility, right? We have to use telecom infrastructure to ensure that people can do telemedicine and teleconsults and use diagnostic tools that are as small as this bottle and can test 1,000 people instead of building a huge clinic and then charge people, you know. So we need to change the dynamics in which we do things to ensure that we can actually care for people properly.
And what's the trajectory to that change from your experience? Because I think recently you were back at home sort of discussing or involved in something
conference.
That's something similar.
I think,
how close are we to actually being able to have that vision be something that's materialized?
The thing about Nigeria is that we know how to write policies. We know how to write action papers, right? But when it comes to the actual doing, nothing in Nigeria happens on a global scale. It's in fits and starts, and it's very geographic, right? So, for example, healthcare in Lagos is very different, right? Much more advanced than healthcare in Abia State is. Lagos's challenge is traffic. Right? And so because of traffic, you can't get there. Right? They have great hospitals, great doctors, they're building more, but you could spend 2 hours. Right? And so then there are now people that are trying to get into the medical transportation business, either by helivac or ambulance systems that can get through traffic, right? That wouldn't be the approach you would take in an Enugu or Port Harcourt or in Abuja.
The challenges are different.
Right? Challenges are different. Or when I was in Abuja this last time, the transportation and movement challenge is there. The infrastructure is there. Now it's about connecting all the dots through telecommunications.
Okay.
Everybody, not everybody, but a lot of the players have mobile phones. There's telecommunications, internet's there. They now have to upgrade the internet and connect the hospitals so they can have a talking network. Right? So it's step by step, but we never do things on a nationwide scale.
Of course, and most things don't happen on a nationwide scale over there. Now to talk about mentoring. How active, well, let's imagine young Nigerian person has questions or something. How active are you in mentoring others? And what was mentorship for you, right? Evolve to where you are. What was it like? Did you have access to mentors? I mean, and why are you laughing?
I'm laughing because mentorship's not a conversation in Nigeria. In my generation, mentorship was not a conversation.
Okay.
And in fact...
Is it a conversation now?
Yes, it is now. Yeah,
Just as long as we've evolved to a point where it is a conversation.
Because now we have the internet.
Okay.
Right? So people are not waiting for it to come from where they are. They're going to reach out to find that information. Yeah. So very different, right? But when I was in medical school, nobody ever talked about a mentor-mentee relationship. I realized in looking back that there were one or two people who took an interest in me and provided me support, it wasn't financials, more emotional support, saying, hey, you can do this, you're doing well, keep on going. There was actually a gentleman, he was the assistant chief medical director when I was doing my house job, Dr. Momo. And truthfully, without him, I would never have gotten into School of Public Health because he had internet in his office. Okay. This one was dial-up. Oh, right, wow. And I didn't have dial-up in my house where I lived with my mom, so he had it, and he would let me use it any time of day. Okay. Anytime I was free, I would go to his house, his office, and then he got it in his house, and I could go to his house at night. Right. I would show him how to do stuff online, maybe help him with some papers that he was writing. Then he would let me browse the internet. So I registered for my GRE, got my TOEFL waiver, applied for all the schools through that. Right. And so he was an informal mentor, and I think people need to understand. Mentoring can be formal and informal. Right. It doesn't have to be structured, right? It can just be a relationship that starts de novo.
And you don't have to actually put a title on it.
Yes, exactly.
Because a lot of times people are so caught up with, I want a mentor. Like, you can have the relationship without putting the title on it.
But then when I came to the United States during my School of Public Health years, that's when I realized that mentoring was a thing. It's a thing, right? It was a structured thing. Right. And they talked about both structured and informal, formal and informal mentoring. And then I started to realize, oh wow, this is really how people get ahead. And in Igbo, we say imemadu. But we say imemadu as a bad thing. Imemadu is a bad thing in Nigeria. Imemadu is
because that's more nepotism.
There's no difference.
Okay.
There's truly no difference.
There is no difference in nepotism and mentoring. That is interesting. Okay.
I mean,
I'm going to have to
is I know you.
Yes, and you're helping me and I will help you.
There's no difference. If I have a Harvard tie right now, I can call anybody in Harvard and say, I'm class of 91, they'll help you. Or in USC, where I'm doing my MBA, they preach it consistently. You're part of the Trojan family. If you ever need help, call a Trojan, they will help you. Care of you. Right? The residents that come in, the medical students that come into most programs that are foreign medical graduates these days, is because they picked up the phone and called somebody they don't know. Or somebody they know that texted another person, and I get these calls all the time and they say, hey, I have a friend. And you look at the resume, and if the resume is up to par, you put them in. And you don't just put it in, you talk to the program director and say, this is my person. Right. And so, you won't understand it.
Do we do that enough? Africans, Nigerians? You just said Oyibo's understand it, which is exactly where I was going. Do we do that enough? Not just in medicine, but from your observations, your friends, talking to other people. Do we do that enough?
I think it's an interesting conversation. We do it enough. There's different parameters around it. Okay. In the Yankee connotation, that mentoring or that I will have the tie or I have the crest is not a demand. It's a request. In the Nigerian context, and I get this all the time, people are calling you with the expectation that you will do it. And if you don't, it then becomes a negative engagement. And that's where I've seen people that have immense power and ability to help people's lives unfold. They've stopped doing it because they've had a bad experience. Somebody has told them, that you are there. Who put you there? Why can't you help me now? Nonsense person. And that gives them a sour taste.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they don't want to do it anymore.
I also think in the Yankee versus Nigeria connotation, I think in Yankee there's more of a relationship massaging that happens in the process. Like a relationship building thing. And I don't think we do that as well.
Fair enough, but
you don't think that's relevant?
I think that it just depends on the field.
Okay.
You know what I mean? The profession, the field. Right. I've seen it happen both ways. I've been in a dean's office and the dean called another dean.
Right.
And they knew each other from before. They weren't like great friends. They were like, hey, I need you to put a student in your school. I'm like, okay, cool. And he'll just do it. There's no quid pro quo. Right. But it's just done because they're friends, right? And I've seen the Nigerian side too, where literally 3 weeks ago, somebody texted me about a friend's friend. That friend's friends texted me. We talked, said they had another person that was applying for a program where I have some influence, and I looked at the resume. The resume was up to par, and I got them an interview. I don't know any of these people. Right. There's no relationship massaging. Well, I know.
You know someone that had access to you.
But I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The person
that
that's
had
actually getting
access
the
to
help
you
doesn't need anything.
But the person that had access to you does have some sort of a relationship with you.
Yeah, definitely.
Right. It wasn't just out of the blue because we went to school together.
But some people do out of the blue. I mean, I get cold calls all the time.
Really?
Oh yeah. Cold calls, cold emails. I let people call my clinic every summer. My staff now know if some Nigerian says they want to talk to their Uncle Oge, it's because they want to try to get into residency.
They know, and and they know the deal.
And then I just say, just get their CV and let's go from there.
Right.
It's just easier that way.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So we part of the Foshty idea is not just talking to immigrants and their experiences and getting to really understand what the perspectives that we have, but it's also thinking about the younger generation, right? The other people who are coming after you who may have similar stories or maybe very different stories. What would you say has been one, if you have a favorite quote, driving thought, something that you've held on to over the years to kind of keep you going? I imagine at some point when you were, I don't know, in a kitchen somewhere, knowing what your goals were and knowing what's required to actually get there, what was something that helped you keep the light going?
That's interesting.
Maybe it's a thought.
I mean, I'll tell a story that will hopefully help me get there. When I was applying for my American visa in 2002, they didn't have the system they have now where you apply online and all that. So you just showed up. Okay. And you showed up, and every day there was 5,000 to 15,000 people there. And you hoped that you could get in.
How many people would get in? Sorry.
100 to 200 a day.
God.
And so I got there on a Monday, and I went on a Tuesday, and I went on a Wednesday, and I finally got in on a Thursday, and I got my visa. The weekend before, I was hanging out with my boys in Ikoyi, and we were just gisting. They told, boy, they go interview. And I said, wow, they go interview. And a lot of my friends were in military hospital Yaba at that point in time, or military hospital Ikoyi. I was hanging out with them. And one night, the night before my interview, we were just standing there drinking whatever drink, Star, Golda, whatever, and the lagoon was behind us. And I just turned to my friend and I said, oh boy, if I don't get that visa tomorrow, I'm lagoon at the jump.
Did you really feel it, or were you joking? Did you feel that desperate, or were you just joking?
I don't think so. I've been blessed in many ways, right? The majority of the things I've tried to do, I've been able to do. Okay. And so I hadn't reached the point of desperation because I hadn't been rejected yet. However, I knew my status in this country did not warrant me getting into a lot of things that I would need to do to be a doctor.
Your status in Nigeria.
I didn't know anybody.
Okay.
Right? My mom was a poor lecturer. I didn't know anybody.
Yeah. You didn't have the connections.
I didn't have the connections that I needed to get into a lot of various programs.
Right.
And so even though I said it as a joke, in the back of my mind, I was like, oh boy, if I don't get this visa, it will rough me for this country. Right. I don't have a job. I didn't have anything to do. And so once I came here, not necessarily that same, I go jump into a lagoon, but I think me and a host of other Nigerians realized that there's no going back. Right.
There's no other option.
This is where you are. Yeah. And if they call you, African, fine. They call you nigger,
Yeah.
fine. If they say your mouth smells, fine.
That's okay.
They say your accent is bad.
That's fine. No problem.
Can I pass exam? I can pass exam. I can work hard. And that is what I tell people all the time. Because sometimes I get people that come to me and they talk, and I'm like, you're getting bent out of shape over the wrong things, right? And this is neither here nor there, but you're not a Kata. You're a Niger person. And yes, you have the same skin color, but you don't have the same experience. You don't have the same background. I need you to stop complaining and get it done, right? And, you know, there's a host of wonderful things that this country can give us, can give me, your family, whatever. But sometimes, and again, it's a very biased, myopic viewpoint just because I feel I'm Nigerian at my core. Sometimes the whininess of this country is too much. It makes people soft. Right? You come to the Yankee and there's everything here. You don't have to hustle for it anymore. And so you get a little bit soft, right? And sometimes I remind people, oh boy, remember where you came from. Yeah. Right? So yes, you're complaining, but I mean, come on, move on.
Okay. How does that apply to your kids? Do you see that softness?
Oh, completely. They're wimps. They're total punks. My daughter and my son, I love them to death. But if I were to drop them in federal government college today, they'd die. They wouldn't have the ability to cope.
Would you ever consider that?
I thought about it for a while.
School in
but then me and a friend took a trip a couple of years ago, did some research, went to some schools. Can't remember where we went, and I was like, if this is the best, may as well leave them in public school in Yankee and just be done with it.
Okay, I mean, but that toughness though, because it's not just the education; it's also
So the other thing I've noticed I've realized is that toughness is great, and I hope to find a way to instill something of it in them, right? Yeah. And people say take them to Nigeria more often. Why does that matter? All of my in-laws work in Shell and Chevron and
the experience is still going to be very
or my brother-in-law has a thriving construction business in Abuja. I mean, the only time they ever see anything other than Yankee life is when they're with my mom, right? Because she's retired and she doesn't have as much as they do, right? And so you know how that works. The dynamics are different. And so, but I've also realized that the people that they're competing against in this country are soft like them. Right, so
the playing field is even.
Yeah, the playing field is more even. Although the more immigrants that come in, I mean, and that's really when you look at it, right? That's the advantage of being a first generation immigrant, and the data is really clear. The third generation, it's all gone, right? So I
mean, by the
third generation across the board, whether it's Asian, Indian, Nigerian, third generation, that advantage of being an immigrant is essentially zero. So all you know is you can do for you. You can do for your kids. Hope to give them some culture. Hope to give them some sort of financial basis or an understanding that education is key, right? And where they came from, where their parents came from, and hope they pass it on to their parents. You're going to be dead and gone by that time. And so you hope you leave a legacy, but I mean, the only real legacy is money.
Well, money invested, leave it in such a way that it actually keeps
the original
going.
Rockefeller, we may still know his name. We don't know what he did. A lot of people don't know what he did, but he made so much money. There's a Rockefeller Foundation, right? He will be our kids' kids. That'll be the Zuckerbergs, right? And the Sergey and Co. and Google. They'll have a foundation, and they'll be talking about them 100 years from now. Right? So
that is true.
You can only do what you can do in the time being. I always tell people, you have to be able to cherish the breath that you take, enjoy the life day to day. It may not be the perfect life, but it's your life. Right. And a lot of times you have that ability to change it or improve it, right? Give your
just yours, and then hope to
and give your children the understanding that life is a gift, and they have to treat it like a gift, right? And I think if they do that, they'll be on the right track one way or the other.
And on that note,
we're done.
Thank you.
It's a wrap.
Yeah, it's a wrap. Yeah. Thank you for talking to us. Where can people find you if someone wanted to follow you, social media?
Twitter, it's Oge Isimo. I'm sure when you edit it, you'll put it at the bottom somewhere here. I'll put my LinkedIn, and I mean, my journey is not done yet. Hopefully, taking a different trajectory now, and we'll see what happens.
Okay. Do you? I usually tell my guests they can ask me a question or two towards the end of the show. So, do you have any questions? You don't have to. If you don't have any questions, that's absolutely fine.
Definitely. So, for you, being an Igbo girl in Houston,
Mm-hmm.
what has been the hardest cultural thing for you to get used to?
Oh, wow, that's a good one. The hardest cultural thing to get used to. Sheesh. I will say probably I moved here. I used the phrase a couple of days ago on a different episode, the middle bridge immigrants. And I tried to explain that it's those of us who kind of come here at distinctive formative years, right? Like not only are you sort of the transitional immigrant that's moving from first generation, that's moving from one country to another, but you're also coming at a time where you don't have any strong footing
in either side.
And you get to define what this space looks like. The hardest thing, that was the question, was coming here as a teenager and trying to figure out where I fit in here. Two things happened within a short span. I was raised by my father, so I think already that was a little different because most girls are raised by their moms and they're raised in typical girl fashion. I was raised by someone who, smoked and drank and would give me taste of Remy Martin and stuff. And there was a lot of male energy around. So there are certain things that just didn't fit for me naturally.
Interesting.
And then moving to the States, I now came to live with my mom in my teenage years. So there's already that teenage angst going on. Then having the dynamic of growing up with a traditional Nigerian mother in the US, and then having to keep up with so not just the internal shift just from that male daughter thing to mother daughter thing. There is the coming to the US and trying to figure out, okay, how does this work? Because I'm a girl, but I really don't do all this. I don't have this girl energy. I really don't care about the things. I've been in school, I remember high school, and something they'll talk about. I'm like, this doesn't make I can't. I don't even know how to begin to get into it. And then my mother did what I consider probably the worst thing ever. She changed my name. And I think for about 3 or 4 years, I had an internal identity crisis. Yes, to Diane, which you don't know this. So yes, the hardest thing was really trying to permit myself to be who I really was versus what I thought I needed to be to fit in whatever context fitting in was. Interesting. Personally and society as well. Yeah.
Let me ask you another question.
Okay, I thought we were going to be done with one, but sure,
no,
go ahead.
So,
last one.
So this is just something that has come up. So one of the other things that I do is I speak, right, for a lot of pharmaceutical companies.
We didn't talk about your TED Talk. Okay, we'll have to.
You can put that in the description.
Yes, we'll have to put it in the description.
But a lot of, not all of the medical science liaison colleagues that I work with for a certain company, they're all female and they're all black. Right?
Interesting.
About a third of them are Nigerian.
Interesting.
It's interesting to me, the more I listen to them, the struggles that they have around dating and finding a mate. Because there are not a lot of Nigerian guys that are millennials that are necessarily looking for a Nigerian female. Because it seems to me, as an external person, that the Nigerian guy can marry any race.
Yes.
Doesn't care.
Yes.
It's a buffet for him.
Yes.
But the Nigerian woman...
And most black men in general.
Yes.
It is.
But the Nigerian woman wants to marry a Nigerian man.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give a millennial Nigerian, born or raised here, with Nigerian parents, who is single?
Ooh, that is a tough one. That is such a tough one. That is a tough one because I have such a deep passion and appreciation and desire for our culture to still be intact and our history to kind of flow and, maintaining that. Yeah. But I also understand that relationships and marriage or mating or whatever you call it doesn't necessarily have to follow the rules. So the question is, what advice would I give them?
Yeah.
One, definitely figure out what's important to you, because a lot of times we're working off of what's important to the people that raised us and not necessarily what's important to us. And once you're clear on what is important to you, then it's easier to shift as you need to. someone, I have kids, I want to teach them Igbo. I talk to them in Igbo. I will write little Igbo books. I'll make little Igbo notes. I want to get them to respond to me in Igbo because that's important to me. I keep telling them, oh, that's our secret language. We're going to do it. That's passionate. That's a big deal. For some people, they don't really care. And if they don't care, then they don't care. As you say, by the third generation, you've lost certain things. That's just a fact of life. There's no way that we're going to maintain that. And I don't think we should carry the weight of trying to maintain it either.
A whole generation.
And that's the thing. A lot of women walk around with the weight of keeping this thing together for their parents. Meanwhile, it's not going to happen. So you find love and you find,
Find it wherever you find it.
Find it wherever you find it. And don't limit yourself. If it's one thing if you want to limit yourself because it's such a deep thing for you to do that. It's another when it's really baseless. So find it where you find it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you sitting down and talking to us.
It's been fun.
And once again, this is Foshty, and I am Zaya Felix. Thanks for joining us.